Hey Cornerstone, it's Scott. Today's Cornerstone connection comes from Psalm 54. In Psalm 54, David is a man on the run. He's a fugitive. He's running from King Saul. And this is a very difficult period of his life. What do you do when you are up against circumstances that are beyond your control? I hope that you pray. Prayer, after all, should be our first and best response to any and all situations in life. And that's what David does in this situation. Look at verse 1. He says, "Oh God, save me by your name." He's appealing to God in prayer. And then he goes and he describes what he's going through to the Lord. He appeals to God to hear his prayer. And so he says here in verse 2, "Oh God, hear my prayer." Now, church, God hears the prayers of his people. We're promised that we have the ear of God. We have access to God through faith in Jesus Christ. And we know that God knows everything, and yet God still wants us to voice our prayer. And that's what David does here. You see, in verse 3, he prayerfully describes the situation that he faces. Now that he has the ear of God, he can describe his situation before God. And in verse 3, he says, strangers have risen against me. I'm a man on the run being pursued by people who want to seek my life. He says, ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves. And so in prayer, we take our situation, we take our circumstances, and we just lay it out before God. God, here's what I'm going through. But we also encourage ourselves by remembering who God is. We don't wallow in our circumstances. We don't ruminate over how hard things are, but rather we prayerfully remember who we are praying to. And that's what David does in verse 4. He says, "Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. Yes, people are seeking to kill me. Yes, my situation seems impossible. But the God to whom I pray is the God of the impossible. All things are possible for him, and he upholds my life, and he can help me even though this situation is dire." And then David goes before God and just lays out his request openly before him in verse 5. He says, "He, God, will return evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness put an end to them." God is not just sitting back completely blind to my situation, but I know that he will act. He will put an end to my enemies. Salvation is coming. You see, David is anchoring himself in who God is and what God does. This is in the character of God to deliver his people. And he knows he has the ear of God. He knows he can lay out his life and his circumstance before God. And he knows who God is and what God will do. Church, what a gift it is to go into the presence of Almighty God in prayer, lifting up our requests to him, knowing that we have his ear and that he seeks to answer prayer for his glory and for the good of his people. And so whatever it is you're facing today, whatever circumstance, no matter how impossible it is, run to God in prayer, just as David did, and know that God hears you and he loves you, and he will answer for his glory and for your good.